I'm Dr. Sarah Olivo.
And I'm Dr. Liz Seidler, and you're listening to College is Fine, Everything's Fine.
It is so exciting to have you on right now. I think our audience is going to be really happy and just feel heard by some of the things you're going to share with us. So why don't you go ahead and say hi to the students listening and tell us a little bit about yourself.
It's great to be here. My name is Emi Nietfeld, and I am a mental health activist, journalist, and the author of Acceptance, which is a memoir of my journey through high school, including troubled teen treatment, my parents' mental illness, my own mental illness, foster care, and homelessness, all obsessed with college admissions. And eventually I did get into Harvard and then really struggled with having had this goal that defined my whole life and then realizing that it wasn't going to save me. And so I started writing this book when I was in high school, applying to college, and I felt like that process of marketing yourself as a 16, 17, 18-year-old was just so emotionally grueling and took so much out of me. I felt like so many other people must be going through the same thing, and yet nobody is talking about it.
It's this most pressure-filled essay you'll probably write in your life. How do I wrap this nice little narrative of myself, present it to a various range of people who don't know me? I'm sure I know it ties a lot of people in knots.
And it's so damaging because of the rhetoric around it, where I would ask people, what do I need to do to get into college? And they would tell me, just be yourself. And there's this conflation of the self with the personal statement and the self with being somebody who's worthy of admitting to college or not.
Sarah and I are in the thick of it in terms of a lot of college students worrying and ruminating about what they put in their essays and their applications as they sit and bite their nails about their acceptances and whether or not they're going to get in or not in these next few weeks. So it's a timely conversation to be having.
One of the things I was really excited to hear you talk more about is this idea of healer culture or resilience. I think there's some words that just start to lose their meaning after a while. So we saw resilience as this thing. I remember in graduate school when I was there eons ago, it was like, oh, we're going to study resilience and how people can be resilient. And then now it's just become this, I don't know, I just feel like it's lost its meaning a little bit. It's now sort of like a branded word. And I think it can be harmful when that's the idea of how anyone needs to overcome something, that resilience is the expectation, as if we can control all the factors that lead to resilience. Could you talk a little bit more about that idea?
I'm so glad you're asking me about this because this is my pet peeve. There has been a huge uptick in resilience and also grit as this panacea, right? Young people are struggling, and no matter why, the solution is grit. And so we all want to encourage other people to have inner strength in the face of challenges. But often we struggle because there's something going wrong in the world or in society or in our family. And often those problems, they need to be addressed in order for a child or a family to have a good outcome. And I feel like resilience in my life was really this Band-Aid where I came in and I was dealing with depression and I was like, hey, my mom, I didn't have the words like this, but my mom dealt with hoarding disorder. We lived in a house that was very dirty and we didn't even have clean air. And I was told, like, you have to be stronger. You have to learn how to deal with it. And, obviously you want people to not be affected too much by the bad things that happen to them. But some problems need solution.
I just get really mad when people act like resilience is the thing that the child needs to do. I remember one of my mentors back in the day when we were talking about childhood trauma and how to have impact in it. And he's like, you have a girl come in, if she has an issue with the fact that she has a lot of trust issues in her home. She doesn't have a door. She's constantly being ogled by her older brother because, and she gets really uncomfortable. The first thing you do is you go and you get her a door. That's your first intervention. And then you can start to work with all the other ways to help her go stronger and be assertive. But first, you get the door. And I think not enough people pay attention to that aspect of it.
That's such a good story, especially because it depends so much on class, where kids who are disadvantaged, whether it's, class or family or gender in some way, the more disadvantaged you are, the more likely other people are going to tell you to be resilient. When really sometimes what you need is a door, it's food, it's safety, it's an equitable school.
I remember a patient was telling me once, if I'm not resilient, then there must be like something wrong with me, right? There's something wrong with my personality or makeup in terms of why somebody else was able to overcome, their circumstances. But it's clear that there are a lot of systemic issues and environmental interventions that are needed. So I'm glad we brought it up. And your book speaks, I think, a lot about that. Okay. Is there any advice, like thinking back, I was saying earlier that Sarah, it's been a while since we've been in college, right? So Emi might be a little closer to her graduation date, but we're really passionate about college students kind of like demystifying some myths or beliefs they have about what college is going to be like. So thinking about when you've stepped on campus at first day, is there any advice or something you wish you would have been able to tell your former self that would have been helpful to you?
I imagined that college was going to be a campus full of other people just like me. And I didn't realize that the dominant culture could be so different than the one that I grew up in. And that there were places on campus that I ended up feeling really welcome and really a part of something. Like I joined the rowing team, which is something I never thought I would do. I joined a women in computer science club, and I moved into a house that was like a great community. But I wish I had known that I was really going to have to seek out those specific places where other people would have similar values and similar goals, and that a campus with 6,000 undergrads, let alone one with 20,000 or 30,000, it just wasn't going to be like a warm, protective bubble in the way I kind of imagined. And the way that these other places were, they were a great little bubble for me. Yeah.
So if you were going to say, instead of resilience, right, as you're sort of seeking out mental health resources or bubbles, communities within the campus, which I get, that's probably pretty normal to sort of find the people that feel most like you. Do you find that there's another word or a piece of advice besides be resilient that you would say instead?
That's a great question. For me, the anecdote for toxic resilience has really been acceptance, in a way, of recognizing, these bad things happen to all of us and we're affected by them, and that's okay. And we don't have to be made stronger by every single thing that happens in our life for us to be strong, worthy humans. And that's really where I've found peace. And also just in the idea of kind of taking care of yourself and advocating for yourself, right? So often telling people, oh, be resilient is a way to shut them up. And so instead, like, recognizing, okay, you know what you need, and you have as much right as anybody else to have those needs be met.
Another thing, and it's a big concern of college students, and I think universities are finally paying attention to, is the lack of resources for mental health treatments on college campuses, as well as in communities of college campuses, awareness of even mental health issues that college students are struggling with. What was your experience like at college with that?
When I got to college, I tried to seek counseling from the mental health services department. And I went through an intake, and as I remember it, I was asked questions like, oh, are you harming yourself? Do you have an eating disorder? And all of those things had been true in the past, but at the time I was really like trying to take care of myself, like by not doing those behaviors. And so I was denied. I was told, you don't meet our criteria. And I was sent to another agency. And luckily, that other agency actually did provide counseling. And it wasn't so much focused on like mental health conditions as much as just generally student life. But I consider myself really lucky that I was able to get that. And so this was about 12 years ago now. So it was a while ago. But, and things are obviously even harder today. And so I wish that I had been able to be more honest about what was going on for me, and about what had been going on for me. I think that's really hard when you're on a phone call with a stranger you've never talked to before. And there's a lot of stigma, or maybe like me, you've been blamed in the past for having those issues. But that might have helped me get more help to be able to be more honest. And I also wish that I had been able to maintain a relationship with somebody from high school. I hadn't had a therapist for a few years. But if I had, and I were able to just maintain that relationship, that might have been a lot smoother than trying to find somebody new. I wrote a piece for the New York Times about student disclosures of mental health in college applications. And one thing that I learned researching this article is if a student has really specific mental health needs and they generally have resources to be able to pay for college, that it can be really worth looking into like what resources does the school have and what resources does the community have. Because I know in some rural areas, there just are no therapists for anyone. And there's really nothing that the school can even do about it. And for some students, that just might not be safe. And that's totally valid to take into consideration.
I think a lot of people struggle, and the laws are changing around this where you can see people across more state lines. But I know that we talk a lot about, we're sending this person to school in a place where there's no mental health resources. We're technically not allowed to see someone in that state, and it becomes this big like ethical versus legal question of, do I leave this student hanging? And I think most therapists would say, no, I'm willing to risk it because I don't want to send them off. But sometimes that's not the case. And for various reasons, they aren't able to have that bridge. Actually, thinking about some of our listeners who, all right, so they've applied to college, they've made the decision to disclose or not disclose. Now they're starting to think about jobs or summer internships. And, next steps after college, or just something even within the college experience itself, work, study, etc. How much to talk about mental health. And I know some of your more recent articles too, you think about the idea of quiet quitting, this idea of the tension between really holding up to the life is short, let's take care of ourselves, but also feeling engaged and excited and enriched by some job opportunities in some settings. So maybe you could think about the job part of college and your experience since then.
Absolutely. I personally draw a pretty big distinction between disclosing at school or at work and activism. And I think it's totally possible to never tell a university or an employer that you're dealing with a mental health condition and to be a great advocate for other people going through it, to work on destigmatizing it. Because unfortunately, the truth is like, you don't know how somebody is going to respond. You don't know what their stereotypes are or their preconceived ideas. And so I personally have told people, like a manager at work, that I was dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. And, he responded as well as he possibly could have. And in hindsight, I still kind of regret it, because he wasn't a therapist. He wasn't even my friend, right? He was my manager. And everybody's navigating that differently. I think younger people are more likely to be making those disclosures. But I do think, if you ever feel uncomfortable with saying something, you have a right to privacy too. And so that's something where I really tried to give myself grace and just think about, like, if I need to go to a doctor's appointment or I need to go to acupuncture, just think about it as like, it's just a medical condition like anything else. And like, I don't need to tell my boss like what that diagnosis is. I can just like ask for the time that I need and then take it.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you bring that up because I think a lot of college students, which Sarah and I are so grateful for this, there's so much more activism and there's so much more kind of openly speaking about their mental health experience. And I can see how even some of the people I work with get really polarized between like, wait, my value is to be open and honest and spread awareness around this. And am I acting in a way that's like communicating to myself that I should be shameful about this? So I love how you presented that in a really like balanced way, that both those things could be true. I can still kind of pay attention to this value or priority in my life and still observe a limit or a boundary in terms of sharing something where the reaction is really subjective.
Thank you. I also think from my journey working in tech, I had this idea that I needed to just give 100% and always work in the most intense jobs. And that if I took my mental health conditions into account, that would be failure in some way. And then in my last job, I really learned the hard way where I joined a team that was really intense. I knew it was going to be intense and my health really suffered for it. And so I think honestly, like Gen Z is the role model here in terms of like making better decisions. But I wish that I had treated at the time, like my post-traumatic stress disorder as I would any other like disability or illness.
I couldn't agree more that Gen Z does feel like they figured a few things out, and yet there's this generation gap between the people who are hiring and making the choices and managing and the people who said, hey, we actually want to have things that feel purposeful. We want a more well-rounded life. They're sort of, what's the word I'm trying to think of? They've evolved. They're a little bit more evolved. And yet the decisions are still being made by people who have just grown up in a different time, in a different era, and have different ideas. So I think that there can be some confusion about that. Where did you find that you were able to say, how can I navigate the people who aren't in the same place as me and who maybe don't have as much, I don't want to say the word, who maybe aren't as progressive in their thinking around mental health?
Honestly, it was much easier than I thought it would be in some ways, where like a manager or somebody who's kind of your boss and in charge of you, that is very different than like your coworker or your colleague. And that once you're kind of in a space, it can be easier to suss out, like, how are people thinking about things? How are people feeling about things? And when I was in my first job out of college, like a couple years in, I went on mental health leave. And then I started meeting other people who were also going on leave. Or it would be like, oh, this person's thinking about it. Would you talk to them? And that was really great because I think it is really possible to feel super accepted at work and like embraced. And it just might not be from your manager or from a boss. It definitely won't be from an HR representative. Yeah, but so it's not, in my experience, it was not just a totally isolating experience. I just had to be more selective about who I was letting in and how.
So what is your biggest focus and like kind of next steps or any goals in terms of your work?
So I'm writing a number of stories focused on mental health and how that's intersecting with other things in the world. Right now I'm working on a piece about inequality's role in the teen mental health crisis. And I think that there's so many social justice issues that are really intersecting with mental health, but often the emphasis is on medication and therapy, which obviously are super important. And also those are often really inaccessible to people and sometimes don't deal with some of the underlying issues. Yeah. And so for me, standing up for those things has really been a way to feel like, okay, I'm taking my mental health like into my own hands.
General sense that I have is that a lot of times people, parents, college counselors, et cetera, will say, oh, what do you think the mental health crisis is about? How can we help? And we need more resources. I'm like, first of all, even if you can afford therapy right now, it's hard to get just because of the backlog of people who've needed help. And the other piece to it is that part of it is that some of the adults making the decisions in the world, the people at the head of the college campus, they need to worry more about it so that the teens and the students and young adults don't have to worry as much. So it just, again, it's a little bit like, hey, it puts the onus on the therapist or the psychiatrist and the student who's seeking help, but it's not saying, hey, this has to come from top down somewhere, that the grown-ups, the government, those people need to be making decisions that allow for ease of mind in this population, or that can allow for ground up support in this world. So I love that you're paying attention to that. And I think that's a voice that hasn't really been out there or raised very much. So will you keep us posted? I
Yeah.
want to make sure we list that in
I love that. Yeah.
in our resources.
Yeah.
One other thing that I know is really important to you is this idea of, I don't know, you hear this a lot, the hustle culture. I mean, even our Surgeon General is talking about why mental health can be such a difficult time, or why students can experience so much distress, anxiety, depression, et cetera, is because there's this hustle culture. And you're somebody who actually has hustled, right? And quote unquote achieved things. And I do find that a lot of times when there's that achievement, it's a moving target. You achieve, okay, you're supposed to feel great, and then the target moves again. Can you share a little bit more about your experience with achievement?
Absolutely. When I was in high school, I was in a situation where I felt like I have to achieve so much in order to have a better life. And I was coming of age during the financial crisis in the late 2000s, and my family was in the Midwest, like working class. And because of my parents' mental health issues, I was in just some really precarious situations. And so I felt like, okay, I have to get into a school that can give me a full ride in order to be able to like get out of here. And something that I've been frustrated with, and I was back then, was how a lot of the narratives about hustle culture suggest that the cure is just to stop hustling. When the reason that people are hustling so hard is because we live in a winner-take-all world. Like, we do not really have a social safety net. People believe, like, hey, I have to be a high achiever in order to have a home and food and the ability to have a family. And so I think that there's really deep roots to where that fear and anxiety is coming from. And not to say, oh, we should just accept it, but that it's like really the sign of some bigger things going on in our world. And just to say like, hey, kids, don't stress out. I feel like that almost disrespects young people's awareness of what's going on around them and what needs to happen.
Right. Their eyes are open.
Oh.
So to say, don't see what you're seeing feels so disingenuous.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that the other part of that is, we do live in a world where we're told all the time, if you just get into Harvard, if you just buy a new car, if you just get your dream job, you're going to be happy. And I mean, I really, really bought into that, in part because I needed to. I needed to believe like my life is going to be easy peasy if I just achieve these things. And then when I got into college, that was really my first time experiencing what I now call post-achievement depression, where I worked so hard for a goal, and then I realized like, hey, it doesn't solve all my problems. And it was this real physical come down that really kind of shook a lot of my ideas about the world, and I had to work through in order to move forward.
Right. It's almost like a big, I can imagine like just a big smack in the face, or like the rug pulled out from under you that you'd been, standing on this whole time, where you're like, okay, so this is the thing, this is the thing. And you're just waiting for the relief
Yeah.
or the joy to come. There's a few myths that I think everyone has about happiness. First of all, which is that that's an achievable state, just to be constantly happy. When really life, when you're doing things that are meaningful to you, engaging in relationships or having jobs or studying at a place that you either love or don't, like there's highs and lows to all of those things. And so that happiness is so hard to achieve anyway. So the idea that you could get it from something that's external, like a diploma from a certain place, is a myth. And the other part is that even there's nothing that really can lead to lasting happiness, because that's not an achievable thing every single day. Even when we're in a good place in our lives, we have a whole range of emotions. We have a memory that makes us remember a sad time. We have a future worry that pops into our head. So I think you're mentioning sort of two things. One is that happiness has to be the goal in the first place, and that something external can get you there. And so, yes, the minute someone says, okay, if I win this race and get my best time, then I'll feel like I have an achievement. Well, no, then the target moves. All right, I'm going to go get into this school. And once I've gotten in, whew, what a relief. Then the target moves. Well, now I have to get the right job. Now I have to get the right, because it's all externally based. So I think that starting to get that message out of like everything that you do, if you feel like you can have some acceptance back to your point, some acceptance of where things are right now and all the things that come with it, the highs and the lows and the pros and the cons, and that the next phase too will also have those things. It's not as fun, right? Because you feel like, but it's a much more reasonable, I think in the long term, actually a much more contented place or fulfilled place versus happy place.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Yeah.
You've been so gracious to give us the time you have today. And it's a thrill to meet you after getting a chance to read your book and to see that just feels like it's the start of a really exciting career in writing and advocacy. So I'm not just saying this for the podcast. It's genuinely really exciting.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been so great to talk to you too. And I love college students, and I'm so passionate about college student mental health. So I'm so grateful to be on this show today.
Thank you so much, Emi. You've been wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you to our guests for sharing their stories and their advice. This podcast is for college students, and we want input by college students, so please reach out by text, email, or voice memo to collegesfinepodcast@gmail.com or 929-500-2231. Tell us your story, give us tips on topics you'd like to hear, or give us feedback about an episode.
Follow us on TikTok and Instagram at College is Fine Podcast for episode announcements and resources. And last but not least, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the podcast. Every hit of that plus button helps us keep going.